as we get into it. So welcome to the Savary Island Groundwater webinar. I'm Laura Rodden. I'm Manager of Planning Services here for Qathet Regional District. And I'm accompanied tonight here by Julia Dykstra, who's the Regional District Planner that works with me here at the office. And we're so pleased that you can join us this evening for this deep dive into the Savary Island Groundwater Study. I need to just focus on a few housekeeping issues to highlight before we get started. So there's big winds tonight, stormy out there, and if we lose power at the office, we can reschedule this webinar for a future date. Hopefully that won't happen, but just in case you lose us, we will reschedule. The webinar is being recorded and it will be posted online on the Savary Island community.
You automatically got muted, Laura. I've had that happen to me before on some virtual calls. For some reason, you just to mute. So you were doing well, but
Okay, where did you lose me?
Not too far. So I think we get the point that we're sitting
Okay,
after losing power, which was interesting.
okay. So the webinar is being recorded.
Okay.
It will be posted online on the Savary Island Community Plan webpage in the next few days. And this will make the webinar accessible for community members that are unable to participate tonight. And I want to mention too that participants may have received some email notifications over the last few days as the Zoom settings for this webinar were being updated. And I just want to apologize for any confusion that might have caused for anyone. It really
I thought it was just me.
It was us working on the back end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So some of the changes are Julia has put all participants on mute and well, I can see everyone now, but I think the plan was to turn off the cameras just to provide an optimal listening experience during the presentation.
Okay.
And if anyone is experiencing technical difficulties at any point, you can use the chat function to ask for support, and Julia will help you out. So groundwater protection has garnered a lot of attention in the Savary Island Community Plan review and update process. And community members have been asking us technical questions and expressing a desire to learn more about the current state of groundwater on the island, the future carrying capacity of the aquifer, and ways that the community can protect the water source for future generations. So the Regional District is hosting this webinar as a learning opportunity for Savary Island community members. The first part of the webinar is going to be a presentation from Sylvia Barroso. She's the senior geohydrologist from GW Solutions and author of the recent Savary Island Groundwater Assessment. And the second part of the webinar will be a question and answer session. And there should be ample time left for questions after the presentation. And joining us this evening to help answer questions are Jack Davidson, Environmental Health Officer from Vancouver Coastal Health, and Elise Sandel from BC's Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. And there are a lot of community members online, and we're going to do our best to manage our time together so that everyone has an opportunity to ask their questions. And we ask that you all respect everyone's time and keep your questions concise and focused on the topic of groundwater. If you have other questions about the official community plan process, Julie and I are happy to answer those questions during regular office hours. And you can email us at planning@qathet.ca. So without further ado, let's get started with the presentation. And please welcome Sylvia Barroso.
Thank you. just going to get my presentation set up here and do a little technology check. Does everything look good and sound good?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to present the results of our Savary Island Groundwater Assessment Project. This was a very interesting project that we completed earlier this year, and so it's a great opportunity to present to the community as a whole, having done previous presentations for the regional board as well as for the planning committee. The Savary Island, also known as Kaikwan, is named after the freshwater springs that were the abundant water source for the Tla'amin Nation, the ancestors who lived and recreated and harvested on Savary Island since time immemorial. So as part of this project, we wanted to utilize utilize the traditional place names of Kaikwan and to recognize this historical legacy of groundwater sources, springs that were a water supply to the island. And that was something that was very important to us. So giving that acknowledgement to this place that has been stewarded since time immemorial by the Tla'amin, and then continues to be stewarded by the many people who live there and care for it in present day. So the project that we undertook was completed in several phases. So beginning in August 2024, we began to compile all of the available data for the island, including any kind of water resource data. We completed a resident survey online and a field assessment component. We completed a geologic model of the island using a three-dimensional modeling software, and collected and analyzed any historic data from monitoring of either groundwater levels and groundwater quality. Using the data collected both in terms of the field assessment and historical review, we developed an assessment of the quantity and quality of groundwater on the island. So that included developing a water balance for the island, so looking at the aspects of the water cycle, including precipitation, groundwater recharge, water usage, and losses through evapotranspiration. We did a climate change impact assessment to predict what future climatic conditions would look like in terms and how that might affect water resources availability on the island. We looked at aquifer vulnerability to contamination from the land surface, and looked at the hazard and potential impacts of seawater intrusion within this island setting. And then using that analysis, we made recommendations with respect to aquifer protection and monitoring plan and strategies that could be undertaken both by members of the community and by the government, and how to ensure continued availability of groundwater and protection into the future. We completed the work in late winter of 2025, or January 2025, and then have undertaken some communications of the project results since then. So today I'm going to talk, my talk today initially starts with the description of our sort of data analysis and inventory. I'm focusing mainly initially on the quantity component of groundwater, and then secondarily looking at the quality component, and then tertiarily, finally, we'll wrap up with some recommendations for well stewardship or water source protection that can benefit residents to ensure that their water source is of good quality, and that they undertake the testing and maintenance required to ensure that it is potable and safe. So Savary Island is about 5 kilometers square in area. It has, for much of the island, has been subdivided historically into basically an urban grid of mainly small lots of approximately a quarter acre each. The population of the island ranges from 70 to 100 people in the winter and can increase significantly during the summer period. Sometimes it's difficult to determine the total summer population, but some numbers that have been put out there is anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 people. The island is subdivided into about 1,300 lots. Most of the lots have their own well and septic system. Within this blue highlighted area, Savary Shores Improvement District, water is supplied by a water purveyor. When we did a field inventory of wells and compiled all of the information about water sources on the island, although the groundwater wells and aquifers database, the provincial database, only shows 90 registered wells, we field verified through our study and previous studies a minimum of 230 wells, and we expect or anticipate that based on land use that an additional over 400 wells are inferred to be present on the island. So that's a tremendous well density for an island of this size. This is just a visual overview of the 3D hydrogeologic model that we created in Leapfrog Hydro. So it incorporated information from well construction records, the lithology, as well as geologic mapping, detailed topographic mapping, soils, and other information to essentially map the layers and areas of in the subsurface and on the land surface. It was really important that we complete an assessment of current conditions on the island rather than it being a desktop review or compilation of existing data. So an intensive campaign of field assessment was undertaken, in which we visited over 77 sites on the island and documented aspects of water supply or water sources on the island. We measured groundwater levels at 38 sites. There's 38 wells, including and also estimated well discharge rates, and measured the spring discharge rate at the Kayak One Spring. We collected samples for field analysis of water quality at 47 sites. So that included temperature, dissolved oxygen, electrical conductivity, which is a measure of salinity, and total dissolved solids. We conducted downhole salinity measurements at select sites where there was an indicator that the well could be impacted by saline intrusion or showing the evidence of saline water being present. So that was at 12 sites. And we collected samples for analysis of geochemical quality in the laboratory for 28 wells, one spring, and 2 ocean samples for comparison. So that provided us a very robust point-in-time assessment of groundwater conditions on the island. One of the things that was also really beneficial was the detailed water use records that have been collected by Savary Shores Improvement District and were shared for the use of the project. Savary Shores Improvement District supplies, I believe, I can't remember the number now, 40 connections, something like that. So they have detailed metered records from the late 1990s, and then they have metered use per connection for the last 3 years prior to the study completion. So over time, from the data that were evaluated, Savary Shores Improvement District has roughly doubled annual water demand since its period of operation. So there is an increasing trend in water usage. There's also, we also looked at the per connection metered data to analyze seasonal water use patterns. So you can definitely see the data here shown from 2021 to 2023 that there is a peak in water use during the summer period when there's a larger population of folks staying within Savary Shores Improvement District. The associated homes, and the water use per connection varies from approximately 100 liters per connection in winter up to 400 liters per connection in winter or in summer, and peak summer usage. So these values are small in comparison to provincial and also Vancouver Island, other communities in Vancouver Island, and reflect that people are generally cautious with water use and the types of houses, being off-grid, the energy availability and occupancy are more moderate in comparison to some other communities. So that benefits the water supply in terms of conservation. So using those patterns of water use from Savary Shores Improvement District data, we made assumptions about the water use per parcel across the island as a whole. And considering that monthly occupancy would range from approximately 10% during winter, 10 to 15% during late fall and winter months, up to 80% of island population or lots being occupied during any period during the summer. And the water volume per parcel ranging from 200 liters per parcel during winter up to 400 liters per parcel during the summer. The island also has 3 monitoring locations where groundwater levels and temperature are measured. The most long-standing well on the island is observation well 408. All 3 of these monitoring wells are operated or instrumented by the provincial government staff, so the Provincial Groundwater Observation Well Network. The data from 2 of the sites, Observation Well 408 and Observation Well 511, are available online. And then we got some additional data that were provided to us from Observation Well 500 within the central part of the island that were shared to us from the ministry. So Observation Well 408 is located within the Savary Shores Improvement District and reflects conditions of the aquifer in that area. On an annual basis, the groundwater levels range approximately by about 0.5 meter between winter and summer levels. And the long-term trend has remained relatively stable within this area. Observation Well 511 has come online more recently. It's located in qathet or Indian Point on the west part of the island. And Observation Well 500 is in the center of the island. And these groundwater levels within these wells range from about 5.5 of a meter to 0.8 of a meter on an annual basis. All 3 of the observation wells exhibit tidal influence on a daily basis. And it is anticipated that most wells on the island are similarly influenced by tides. So the water balance model took into account as the parts of the water cycle that influence water availability on the island. So beginning with meteorological information, including solar radiation, temperature, precipitation, the inputs in terms of water to the water supply on the island were considered. We also considered the components that would affect the ability of groundwater to infiltrate or recharge into the local aquifer. So looking at the superficial geology, the land cover and slope being important factors to consider. In terms of water outputs, when rainfall will land on the land surface, and then a certain component will be lost through the transpiration of plants and evaporation from shallow soils. So those losses will, once those are taken into account, will result in a surplus being available for either groundwater recharge or runoff. The groundwater recharge component was then compared to water usage or demand within different areas of the island. And then overall ratio between recharge and usage was considered to evaluate the level of aquifer stress within different regions. Here's some of the input data that looked at current conditions on the island. On an annual basis, most of the precipitation occurs during the rainy season, mainly from the months of October to the month of March. Whereas in actual evapotranspiration will peak in spring and is less in the summertime period because there is less available water for evapotranspiration. And surplus water is essentially not available. Surplus water for recharge is not available in the summer period, and therefore groundwater recharge is not available. So essentially all of the water used within the summer period is obtained from storage within the aquifer, and all of the recharge is going to occur during the winter and winter period. So that's an important thing to consider when you think about the water usage peaking during that period when there's no aquifer recharge. We divided the island up into different management areas. So each management area having similar characteristics, either hydrogeologically or in terms of flow. So looking at, say, on the West Island, the height of land from which flow would flow down toward Qathet Point. Area B, or the meadows. Area C, which is the central part of the island. Area D, undeveloped. Area D, which is Savary Shores, or E, is Savary Shores Improvement District. Area D, which is along the Malaspina Walk and the north side of the island near the marina or boat launch, and Area F, which is the east side of the island. So thinking about looking at the comparison of water inputs, recharge, and water outputs, usage, we looked at the ratio and determined different stress levels. So under 10% of groundwater recharge being used was considered a low level of stress. From 11 to 20% of recharge being used as being moderate, up into greater than 40% being very high level of stress. And then we also considered different scenarios. So we considered our current conditions, which is relatively low water demand per parcel and a seasonal population. And so under those conditions, the aquifer stress is in the low level, although we do see that Qathet Point is much higher or slightly higher than other areas. Other scenarios we considered would be, what if the island had everyone there full time? So what would the water demand look like for that? In that scenario, we did see that the potential stress on the aquifer could increase. And then if we developed all of the island with full-time residents, then we started to get into higher stress, moderate to higher stress levels within the other areas of the island. But we also found that the water availability may not be the only consideration when we think about long-term viability and hazards on the island, and that water quality also plays a very important role. So sort of wrapping up some of the conclusions from the initial analysis, we showed that the recharge to the local aquifer occurs as diffuse recharge over the footprint of the island. It's not connected, it's not hydraulically connected to the mainland or any other source. So as such, all of what happens on the land affects the water availability and the potential water quality. The current water demand is represents up to 7% of annual recharge, with the highest usage to availability ratio at that check point. We talked about this, the assumption that people are in general is a relatively low water use per household. We talked about the seasonal deficit, where the highest population on the island occurs during periods of lowest water availability and lowest groundwater recharge. Looking at potential climate change impacts, the modeling of this region suggests that we may have an overall increase in annual precipitation, but that it will be received over a much shorter time period. So precipitation in the spring is likely to diminish earlier, and that period of no groundwater recharge is likely to extend over a longer time frame. So that's going to increase the potential for seasonal droughts, seawater intrusion, and increased wildfire risk. And that the aquifer as a whole is comprised mainly of just sand, and only some areas have the presence of silt or clay layers that can provide some measure of protection by slowing the infiltration of potential contaminants on the land surface. So definitely many areas of the island are highly vulnerable to contamination. And as we've shown in the field component, and I'll talk about later, that sandy material also affects well construction, which can increase individual vulnerability of individual wells. Definitely some areas have very shallow groundwater levels, and I'll show you some maps that about that later. That also increases vulnerability. So as mentioned, one of the first things that was completed as part of the study was an online survey. Total of 59 respondents provided information. And some of the interesting things that we pulled out from that was one that most people reported having their water source being a drilled well, followed by 56%, followed by 21% who indicated that their water source was a sand point well or a driven well. Those are all down at the qathet point. And then approximately 16% of respondents had water supplied through the local water service area, Savary Shores Improvement District. Only a small number had excavated or dug wells, and some people just used bottled water. So people who had their own individual water source, including a drilled or a sand point well, 44% said that they had never tested the water quality of the well. So that was an interesting thing, and something that shows that maybe there's room for improvement and a lack of understanding of the importance of well testing. Only 30% indicated that they had sampled within the previous 3 to 5 years, or that was the frequency of the sampling. Most people don't have any form of water treatment as well within their system, more than 55%. And similarly, approximately a third have indicated that they had never maintained their septic system. They had a septic system, while approximately half undertook regular pump outs of their solids or regular maintenance. So if we think about sort of potential contaminant sources, folks that may not be undertaking septic maintenance as required, there's no form of disinfection or treatment, and no testing. So there's a lack of knowledge that we have there, and that could affect folks. And it's something that we definitely promote in terms of the need for testing and understanding the water supply and water quality aspects. So here's a map of the upper map shows the different water sources utilized or documented on the island. And we also we took advantage of a previous study that had been completed by David Tupper in 1995, and essentially which completed a well inventory and well testing program. And we've sort of built on that with these dark blue dots representing all of the locations where we collected samples for that field program that we completed in 2024, September 2024. So we combined this current point in time assessment with the historical data from previous studies to try to assess the overall conditions on the island. So there's an example, iron and manganese, iron and manganese are commonly occurring, naturally occurring minerals that are present in groundwater. And in general, we found that very few sources on the island had iron above drinking water guidelines, the aesthetic guidelines. And similarly, manganese concentration within groundwater sampled was generally low and below drinking water limits, whereas there were a select number of sources where the manganese exceeded the maximum acceptable concentration that has been established for manganese in relation to potential health impacts. As an example, the source was a shallow dug well, which probably has very little dilution and very little water, so it was a very concentrated sample. But the majority of sites were within drinking water guidelines. Chloride and nitrate can be indicated or used to indicate potential concerns. For example, chloride can indicate groundwater that has been influenced by the presence of marine source. And also chloride can be elevated within areas that are impacted by septic discharges. So the majority of sites had very fresh water or low chloride concentrations in the groundwater. Nitrate is an element that is not naturally present in groundwater, and where higher concentrations of nitrate are present, it usually indicates a nutrient source, such as septic effluent, sewage, or manure, or that some kind of human or animal waste. And so elevated nitrate may indicate where there is either a concentration of contaminant sources or for some reason the well may be receiving that contamination into it. In all cases, the nitrate concentrations in sources sampled on Savary Island were below drinking water limits. But we did see evidence where the concentrations are above what we considered a natural background. So the areas are impacted by septic discharges. And well construction may be playing a role in where we see elevated concentrations of well construction and operation. Looking at those two components with long-term data that we have from Savary Shore's improvement districts, we saw that the Savary Shore well 2 had an increasing trend in chloride, and that there has been over the long term since the early 1990s a long-term increasing trend in nitrate in both well 1 and in well 2 since it was first constructed. So that and that there was a seasonal influence. So generally the higher concentrations of nitrate were observed within the wet season in comparison to the dry season. Again, all of these concentrations are below drinking water limits, and the system undergoes regular testing to look at the long-term trend, and over more recent years, it seems to have stabilized, but it does indicate the nitrate in particular is above background, the historical background. One of the key things that we pulled out from this study and what we felt that was important to highlight as a potential hazard to groundwater on Savary Island is seawater intrusion. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time to delve into the problem of seawater intrusion. Essentially, seawater intrusion is a mixing between fresh and saline water. So water becomes more saline as a result. Fresh water within an aquifer becomes more saline as a result of mixing in of water from a saline source. Within coastal aquifers, that mixing, that the saline water source is from seawater. The island is surrounded by the ocean, and seawater may be pulled into the aquifer as a result of well pumping or maybe naturally present. In other areas, we may see elevated chloride or indicators of saline conditions within deeper aquifers where mature groundwater is present that has had a long time to dissolve minerals within the rocks and sediments. That is not the case or that may be the case in some sites in Savary, but in general, we believe that it's more to do with active mixing processes. In general, groundwater in BC is relatively fresh with chloride concentrations less than 150 milligrams per liter based on studies that have been done within the Gulf Islands and Eastern Vancouver Island. Whereas seawater has very high concentration of chloride. And so mixing in a very small amount of seawater, 2%, could cause the taste of water to become noticeably salty. And only 4% mixing in of seawater could make that water unusable. Where do we see higher seawater intrusion risks? Obviously, within areas that are close to the coast, areas that have a very low topographic gradient or a low groundwater gradient, areas where we have limited recharge or a high density of wells or high volumes of groundwater extraction from a single point. Oftentimes, seawater intrusion may occur as a result of an uncontrolled leak or overpump that cause overpumping within a source. Definitely see the case where drilled wells are drilled down into the interface between fresh water and seawater. So those wells may intersect a saline zone and cause and allow movement and communication between shallower aquifers and deeper saline aquifer areas. And we do anticipate that climate change will worsen potential impacts and vulnerability to seawater intrusion due to the longer dry season, increased drought, seawater level rise in coastal areas, and storm surges, which can cause wave overtopping of coastal zones that introduce saline water from the top of the aquifer. So this diagram represents this kind of schematically what we might expect. So starting on the left-hand side, we have essentially, rainfall that falls onto the land surface. A component of the water will run off the land, and then a component will infiltrate down into the ground and create groundwater recharge. That groundwater recharge maintains the equilibrium between freshwater and seawater. The seawater has a higher density, and so it sits below that freshwater lens above it. And then between the freshwater and the saline water, there's a mixed brackish or transition zone. The depth to that freshwater saltwater interface or the thickness of that transition zone can vary daily according to tidal fluctuations and seasonally based on patterns of recharge and discharge. On the right-hand side, we represent some of the potential hazards that can cause or contribute to seawater intrusion. We've talked about wells drilled through the freshwater lens into a brackish or saline zone. You can also have wells that pump, and they can contribute to the movement in upward or inland of that interface. With climate change, we anticipate that we may have changes in recharge, as well as periods of higher groundwater use or with no recharge during the summer. So that can increase those potential pumping impacts, as well as the storm surges and sea level rise impacts. Looking at the island from a map point of view, we have two maps. So the upper map shows the depth to groundwater below ground. And the second map shows the groundwater elevation in meters above sea level. So the depth to groundwater below ground, you can see that on the west part of the island, the groundwater table can be from 6 to less than 3 meters below the ground surface. Whereas in the area B, in the sort of central west part of the island, the meadows, that can, the groundwater level can be from 40 to greater than 50 meters below the ground surface. So much deeper wells within those areas and on the far east part of the island, in the upper part. Looking at the groundwater elevation, when we think about trying to control potential impacts of seawater intrusion, sea level is considered kind of a point of a threshold that we want to avoid pumping groundwater levels below sea level. Because of the dynamics of going back to this, if we pump the groundwater, that freshwater lens closer to sea level, that saline interface can move upward because of the dynamics of the physics of it. So if we pump the groundwater level below sea level, then we're much more likely to draw in saline water, even if there's a deeper freshwater lens present. So we can see that in some areas of the island, the groundwater table is very, very shallow above sea level, so 0 to less than 1 meter or less of available drawdown before we hit the sea level. So that's in the qathet region. Whereas in other parts of the island, we only have from 2 to 3 meters of available drawdown before we hit that sea level. So that really shows how shallow that freshwater lens is beneath the island, and that is really this essential vulnerability of the island, the limited available water that is there if we want to try to protect that freshwater resource. This is we modeled the depth to the saline interface over the island and showed that the saline interface could be as little as 5 meters below sea level at the eastern and western points of the island. Whereas, again, we have a much thicker freshwater lens and a deeper depth to the saline interface within the central parts of the island. Up until now, and based on the data that we've collected, there aren't very many sources that have a pure impact of seawater intrusion. But we do see the evidence that there is a mixing occurring. So some wells exhibit the characteristics of groundwater that has mixed with water from a saline source, or that could have elevated chloride as a result of septic discharges. And then we have a number of groundwater sources that have groundwater within the normal or at or below what we would consider background characteristics of background chloride. Looking at the ratio of major elements within the water, we also see this sort of range from very fresh groundwater, fresh recently recharged, well, that's a surface water source, or sound point, sorry, very fresh, recently recharged groundwater up until more water that is characteristic or similar to water from a marine source. So I've already kind of hinted at why saltwater intrusion is a problem, but to get into that a little bit, one thing that we find is that because of the geochemical characteristics, once salination occurs, of an aquifer occurs, the change may be permanent or it can take many years to recover. So say, for example, a well becomes impacted by saltwater intrusion. You may need to rest the well or stop using it for a period of time or reduce usage. But even after that, it may take seasons of additional recharge before the chloride diminishes. If you're using water that has high total dissolved solids and high chloride concentration, that can lead to corrosion of pipes and fixtures and increases the cost for well maintenance and replacement. For example, saline water, and also that tidally influence movement up and down of saline water along the casing can lead to corrosion of the casing, and that can allow contaminants to infiltrate into the well. If water is chlorinated, if it has high chloride and fluoride or bromides, that combines with chloride and creates trihalomethanes, which are harmful to ingest. The Water Sustainability Act prohibits well operation that causes the intrusion of saline water or seawater intrusion into a freshwater aquifer that affects the groundwater quality or use of the groundwater from that source. And if we were to need to go to alternative sources, for example, desalination, those types of options are very costly and energy intensive, and they can be linked to other environmental harms. For example, desalination creates a concentrated brine solution that then has to be disposed of. Wrapping up those conclusions, we want to try to really make an effort to protect that freshwater resource on the island because it is so important to viability of the residents and community there. So one of the best things that we can do to protect our water supply is to ensure that our groundwater sources are constructed, operated, and maintained in the best manner. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the observations we had in terms of well construction practices on the island. We compared the groundwater construction characteristics to the requirements of the Water Sustainability Act groundwater protection regulation. So that groundwater protection regulation provides standards for well drilling, operation, maintenance, and decommissioning at the end of their usable life. So I will talk about each of the different types of water sources we have on the island and what we would be looking at in terms of ideal construction or maintenance. So starting with the standpoint or driven wells, these standpoints are essentially this cylindrical pipe with a perforated pipe that is driven down into a hole in the ground, and it's connected to another pipe and to bring that pipe above the ground surface. So it's relatively shallow diameter, and they can be plumbed either with either a submersible or a jet pump or a hand pump. So if we were to look at ideal sound point construction, that sound point would be driven down into the water table. The external casing, that cylindrical pipe that connects to the well screen, that casing would have a bentonite clay surface seal, which fills that annular space between the surrounding ground and the casing. So then if their contaminants were introduced at the land surface, they would not be able to run down that annular space straight into the well. The groundwater protection regulation requires well identification plates to be attached to new wells that were constructed since 2005. And that helps to identify the well in the field. Every well has to have a proper cap and cap and cover that prevents contaminants being introduced into the well itself. And the casing stick up has to be a minimum of a foot above ground. Dug wells are not a major, although they were mentioned within historic studies. In our experience, that we didn't see very many dug wells that are in active use anymore. But here's an example of one we saw, which had constructed by a aluminum culvert pipe down into the ground and had a small external pump that fed down into the well. As with other types of wells, we want to make sure that the dug wells, which are larger in diameter, have a proper cap and cover that is waterproof and vermin-proof. The surrounding the casing also has to have a surface seal, and that surface seal has to extend 3 feet from the land surface down into consolidated materials. Typically, you'll have your pump down here below the groundwater table. You can also have an identification plate. And you want to mound the earth on the sides of the well to promote flow of any kind of surface water away from the water source. Most of the wells that we observed on the island were drilled wells. And this is your typical drilled well with a casing, a steel casing, 6-inch diameter is a common diameter for domestic wells. They must have a watertight and vermin-proof cap, an identification plate. The casing stick-up has to be a minimum of a foot above ground. They also have a surface seal that prevents contaminants from running down the annular space between the casing and the surrounding material. In this case, I've used the diagram shows the presence of a pitless adapter. So basically, the materials have been dug down and a hole made in the casing to allow the plumbing and water lines to be installed below the frost line and to extend into the house. So this is what a pitless adapter would look like at the well itself. And then the water comes into the well in this screened portion. So, and then here's a picture of what a well screen might look like. And then your pump would go down into the well. If you had a submersible pump, it would sit above the well screen. And if you had an external pump, then just the water lines would go down and the pump would be on the outside. So here's some examples, some pictures of the types of wells or some issues that we saw. So as you know, Savary Island is mainly sandbar. It's a sand spit in the middle of the ocean, and those sandy materials don't have very much. In many areas that we have very, very shallow soil or sand right at the land surface, and those sandy materials don't have ability to sort of hold their structure. And especially with historic wells, there is a potential for those sandy materials to get eroded around the well casing and create this open annular space. If you have a well that has this open annular space around it, that can be a superhighway or a conduit where contaminants will preferentially move toward the well. Sometimes the materials have been removed in order to install water lines, for example. So there'll be ditching across the property and those ditches were left in place. And so that increases the vulnerability of the well to contamination. There's another example of a pitless adapter that was installed and then the hole was never filled back in. And the owner reported that they had total coliforms in their well. It's very likely that surface water precipitation infiltrated quickly down into the well and didn't have that normal filtration or attenuation of bacteria that would occur if you had a sealed annular space water having to infiltrate through the overburden to aquifer. So if you have a well like this, it's really important to do what's called retrofitting a surface seal. Fill that hole back in, put bentonite clay around the well casing itself, and then mound the earth around the well to promote a runoff away from it and backfill all those ditches. A simple one that we saw, we didn't see very frequently, but can occur is when the casing gets has either cut down or materials are infilled around the casing so that it has a very low stick. So that a well that has a very low casing stick up above the ground can be vulnerable to flooding of surface water into it. We saw that with some of the wells that were operated using a generator, well, pumps that were operated using a generator, the generator was located sometimes very close to the well itself. And so this being a fuel source, you want to make sure that any foreign matter, materials, or potential contaminants are maintained a minimum of 3 meters away from the well. And if there's a fuel source, it should have a drip pan that protects the water, any kind of, if there's a fuel spill, that it won't infiltrate into the ground and affect water quality in the well. And then we saw in some areas where there were wells located very close to a potential contaminant source, such a sewage source, such as an outhouse. So the health hazard regulation requires a minimum setback distance of 30 meters between a well and a probable source of contamination. So in this case, it would be a good idea to remove that outhouse and decommission the outhouse properly and have a different way of dealing with the sewage. This schematic just shows what can happen with that unfilled annular space. So you can have septic discharges going down and infiltrating into the aquifer and creating a plume. But you can have, if you have an unfilled annular space, that, as I say, that attenuation mechanism of the subsurface soil won't occur, and you can have short circuiting and rapid movement of contaminants into the wells itself. So one thing that we didn't see widely used on the island, but could be a really good potential water source, is rainwater capture. It's used in many of the southern Gulf Islands, Salt Spring, Gabriola, and although on Savary we did notice that some people had rainwater catchment for their gardens, in general, very few people reported that that was their primary water source. Personally, I think it is a good option if one were living in an area that then they didn't currently have a drilled well, rather than investing in a drilled well, thinking about the possibility of going to rainwater capture. Rainwater, the benefits of rainwater is that it's very fresh. It's generally not impacted by pollutants from sewage, although it can, measures must be taken to decontaminate for bacteria that may be caused by birds or organics within the gutters and such. But many properties on the island already have water storage tanks. So it would be probably feasible to convert to rainwater catchment. There's also really good resources out there, rainwater harvesting guides and guidance for, depending on, and the design and the cost will depend on what you want to use the water for. So it could be used to augment outdoor use. It could be used for non-potable use indoors, or potable use, provided that you had some form of disinfection. So there are some really great guides out there, and it's something that people could consider. So wrapping up on this section, in terms of water quality, most of the groundwater on the island is very fresh and meets the guidelines for drinking water quality. The natural contaminants such as iron and manganese were not elevated in most sources. We did see the presence of nitrate and chloride that indicated potential impact of septic systems. And we saw an increasing nitrate trend in some areas where there were an elevated nitrate above what we would consider background concentrations, which indicates the impacts of those septic discharges. But none of the water sources had concentrations above drinking water limits at present. I will mention that when we undertook our field assessment, it was completed at the end of the dry season. And we took that as a standard its usual method to look at geochemical quality is to sort of look at the worst case scenario, or the period of time when groundwater levels are deepest, and so that you're going to have the highest concentration of things like metals. But nitrate concentrations tend to be higher in the wet season, after there's been a infiltration of rainwater and groundwater recharge. And so the samples that we cook may underrepresent what the seasonal concentration of nitrate may be. In terms of well construction and maintenance, most of the wells met drinking water or groundwater protection regulation guidance, but we do see some this problem with the on-field annular spaces, and I think that further education of well owners to retrofit and or install surface seals could be beneficial, as well as ensuring those contaminant sources are set back, including foreign matter like fuel generators. In terms of the seawater intrusion hazard, as I said previously, I think that's probably the biggest concern for the island. It has a very, very thin freshwater lens that is available, and both the seasonal pattern of high water demand during period of low groundwater recharge, and also in some regional patterns. So for example, on Thatchak Point, the conversion, we saw this trend of converting some people moving from historical Sandpoint well to a drilled well. That has the risk to have more drilled wells into that saline zone, and potential also for higher groundwater usage, which could contribute to the higher seawater intrusion hazard within those areas. It's really important that people monitor the water quality within their wells and keep an eye on the chloride and the salinity, and undertake regular testing to make sure their water is potable and safe to drink. And if they run into problems of salinity, to try to conserve and to investigate further as to the cause. I think well drillers and pump installers who work on the island also play a critical role in helping to educate folks and to share that information about good well maintenance and operation practices. So coming into sort of the aquifer protection plan and monitoring strategy. So if it's not clear from what I've already said, water conservation is key. So making sure that low water use fixtures are used in the home, limit non-essential outdoor use, check for leaks and fix them quickly, use water storage in cisterns, so you could pump into your cistern from your well during wetter season. We could consider alternate water sources like rainwater collection. Making note of and recording changes in water quality over time. And that can help you sort of highlight if problems are occurring. Regular sampling to look at long-term trends and quality. If you have decommissioned wells that are or it's important to decommission or close or backfill wells that are not in use and are not intended to be used in future, because those wells can be a conduit to contamination if forgotten about or something like that. Abandoned wells, they can introduce contaminants into the aquifer. If you have if your water becomes salty, it's important to try to use an alternate supply, investigate the cause, and seek advice if need be. The monitoring, we've got 3 monitoring locations on the island, and it is recommended to continue with that monitoring. In addition, you know, if it resource-wise, there could be a possibility for getting more on-island involvement with the monitoring, because it is quite hard for the provincial staff to make it over to the island. And there could be development of a volunteer water level volunteer monitoring well program that could be installed or utilize domestic wells to develop understanding in other areas of the island. In terms of well owner education, having aquifer signage to highlight the vulnerability of the aquifer protection zone, something like that, could be beneficial, as well as regular workshops to help people to be good stewards of their wells and septic systems, improving neighborhood well inventory and registration of wells in the Groundwater Wells and Aquifers database. And the regional district could think about what kind of financial, logistical, or educational supports they can provide to private property owners to help them to be good stewards of their wells and water sources. I think that the septic design installation requirements, there could be more regulatory oversight of the septic installs on the island, and also the well drilling and pump installation on the island. And definitely in terms of development, it's really important that future development be consistent with this idea of low water use, because it isn't a really abundant source on the island. Some examples of drinking water and watershed protection programs exist in other regions, and those that could be considered by the regional district to be able to invest in and continue to improve our understanding of groundwater on the island and in other areas of the qathet region. So just to wrap up, I want to thank you for your attention today, and we were so grateful to have the support of so many people within the community. We wanted to thank all of the well owners that allowed us to come and visit their wells and collect samples. We especially want to highlight the help that we got and the contributions of Laura Rodden and Sharice Roberts from qathet Regional District, staff from Tla'amin First Nation, Janine Reimer and other staff from the Savary Shores Improvement District, and especially Liz Webster and Paul Layton, who was instrumental in helping us with our survey at Project Point with the Sandpoint wells. So thanks so much, and I think we're on to the question section.
Thanks, Sylvia. I'm just going to ask Laura Rodden and Director Lennox and Jack Davidson, Public Health Officer from Vancouver Coastal Health, and Elle Sandel from the Ministry to turn on their videos if possible. Thank you. So just to let the participants know who are on the video, that we have opened up a question and answer chat, and we also have enabled the raise hand function if you'd like to ask any questions of the people that are on the call, Sylvia being the senior hydrologist for this report.
Yeah, I'll just mention that if you're not familiar with the Q&A, if at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a more with a circle and 3 dots. And if you click on that, you'll get question and answer, and then you can type your questions in.
So I've got a question here in the chat. I don't remember the exact question and options from the resident survey. Is it possible that the frequency of testing your wells doesn't allow for Savary Island Improvement District residents who don't actually test their own water because it's tested monthly by the Improvement District?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can make general assumptions, and I think that people that in the survey, they say they don't test their water. So yeah, if some people indicated that they don't test their water because it's tested by someone else. So we did, account for those types of answers.
Thank you. And then I have Janet Berman. Janet, would you like to turn your video on? And you're stating here you've got a number of comments and questions.
Audio and hold on.
Hello, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
And I've asked,
We
yeah.
just started our video. Hi, Sylvia. Excuse me. I mean, hello, everyone. And Sylvia, who just gave the presentation, thank you very much. So I've got a few questions, a few issues, like just silly things, really. But the first map that you showed has Duck Bay. The name Duck Bay is in the wrong position on the map. I think I sent you an email about that a while ago, but that location map, anyway, it doesn't really matter. But more important is, I thought the that figure that you used for climate change and seawater intrusion or saltwater intrusion was, I thought, a bit misleading. Anyway, that doesn't really matter either. What are the things I want to say here? Yeah, okay. So would it be possible, as you suggested, which is a great suggestion, rainwater capture would be a very useful thing for islanders to do to, supplement groundwater as a source of drinking water. So would it be possible for, the Qathet Authority, Powell River or whatever, to provide barrels and maybe help with the installation and things like that? Or is it simply down to individual islanders to take care of that stuff themselves? I think it would be a useful thing for Powell River or the Qathet Authority to maybe provide, have a day when they bring a whole bunch of barrels onto the island and say, anyone that's interested, here they are, free of charge. Well, not free of charge because we pay for them with our taxes and everything. So that would be something that would be useful. I can't hear anything. Is anyone?
I was just gonna, yeah, sorry, it's Director Lennox here. Thanks for your suggestion. I think what we're trying to get out of this is our first kick at assessment of the report, is ideas just like that. And so I'm sure Ms. Roddens had and Ms. Dykstra have had a chance to look at all these different tools that the QRD could possibly use. And I think we're looking to narrow down a list of reasonable actions, just like you've suggested. So, Ms. Rodden, do you have any comment on where we're at with that?
Yes, thank you. Currently, the regional district doesn't provide a water service on Savary Island and does not tax residents to provide a water service.
Well, you tax us, you do tax us quite, we're paying a lot of money in taxes. And what we get for that, if you talk to most islanders, we get the roads scraped 2-3 times a year or something. That's, well, I mean, of course, we get the hospital and everything on the mainland. We get access to that. But,
Well, what I was going to say was that if there is an interest in a program like this, Sylvia did mention that Regional District of Nanaimo and some of the Gulf Islands had some interesting pilot projects running. And so we can certainly learn from how other local governments have worked to promote maybe rainwater catchment, alternative water sources. Maybe Sylvia might be able to speak to that a little more.
Yeah, I was just looking up that information earlier today, and so I've included some lists of some guides here, resources. Regional District of Nanaimo Rainwater Harvesting Best Practices Guidebook, and they have like a whole page on rainwater harvesting with different resources, including this rainwater harvesting calculator. They have a rural rainwater catchment rebate program. They have several rebate programs, but one of those is the rainwater catchment rebate, and they provide up to $1,000 per parcel, and it's on an application basis for a tank and and the other components of a rainwater system. And then Salt Spring Island also has a local stewardship group, which is has a rebate program, and it depends on the volume and of the storage that you want, and it's up to $750 per applicant that can rebate.
Fantastic. Okay, I suggest that the qathet authority could maybe do something similar.
Thank you for your comments.
Thanks.
No, I'm not done. I have more.
Sorry.
So could qathet authority also possibly send someone during the summer when, you know, there's most of the people are on the island to give us instruction about, number one, well maintenance and operation. Number two, septic system maintenance and operation. You know, like a someone on island arrives, goes to whatever, you know, sets up somewhere, publicize it, people can show up, and then someone could come along and explain exactly what we should do in order to protect and maintain and operate our wells and our septic systems in the best way, you know, to protect the groundwater resources for the island.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. That is outside the area of expertise of local government. However, the provincial agencies, there are provincial agencies that may be able to offer that type of education or support. And I don't know if Elise or Jack might be able to add a little to that question.
I will say that so as one of the recommendations, it did say, you know, having well smart workshops and septic smart workshops would be a potential option. And those are, as Laura is suggesting, that are often done in collaboration with both the regional government and provincial experts. So the model in Regional District of Nanaimo, they have every fall well smart workshops, but they also produce some brochures and such. So the materials that I presented today about kind of what a well should look like, that's some components that would be included within a well smart workshop, but it also could provide advice as to the frequency of water testing, what you should be testing for, problems to look out for, or even education on components of your well. So I think it's a great idea, and but it doesn't have to be on island, although that's, you know, potentially beneficial, but it can be remotely through these types of webinars as well. Yeah.
Okay, I have more. Then water sampling. You mentioned, Sylvia, that not a lot of people are doing water sampling. It's because it's expensive, number one. Number two, most people are perfectly happy with the quality of the water that they're drinking. So there's no incentive to do sampling. So again, maybe if local government could cover that cost. And, you know, I, for instance, would be very happy to double up the use of my personal well as a monitoring well. So but you know, it would be great if the local authority could cover the cost of that. So if the local government agrees with Sylvia that it's a great idea that we have as many monitoring wells as possible on the island, then a good way to make that happen is for the local government to cover the cost of that, because it's very unlikely that individual householders like myself are going to do that and pay for it. So
Yeah, thanks for that question. I have some of the same sort of questions in my head. I believe it's a provincial monitoring program, but Ms. Sandel, do you have any information on how homeowners could get involved or what the true costs are, or maybe what we're getting at here? Any thoughts?
For groundwater observation wells. Yeah, so the provincial groundwater observation well network extends across the entire province, and it focuses on measuring groundwater levels. So we do water quality sampling typically at the time of establishing the well, just as sort of a baseline part of our procedure. And then following that, they're continuously monitored for changes in level, like those charts that Sylvia put up on the presentation that give us information about water quantity specifically. Typically, our program includes having 1 to 2 observation wells in key aquifers that have high demand around the province. So, in the case of Savary Island, we have 3 wells, which is actually quite a high number, given the very high well density on the island. To be able to keep an eye on the groundwater levels there, we have dedicated groundwater technicians on a regional basis that travel around. And every 6 months, they do a routine site visit to each of the wells. So our South Coast area groundwater technician travels from Surrey twice per year up the Sunshine Coast and visits all the wells in the area there to do her routine visits. It is a fairly costly program. Particularly, we operate the provincial observation well networks to a pretty high data standard, and we also have real-time satellite telemetry and solar panels installed on them. That's kind of the upper echelon of data technology that you would typically see in a groundwater observation well. So to have a well outside of the program, typically like the technology and equipment can also be managed at a lower level at a lower cost with less kind of staff time. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, or if you have more specifics you were looking for about that program.
I think my main point was that it would be great if we could get financial support for a whole bunch of things: rainwater capture, well maintenance, septic system maintenance, possible regular water sampling. Sylvia is saying, it's a good idea for individual owners to sample their own water over time, so that we see, if there's any trend in the chemistry change, saltwater intrusion or septic contamination or whatever. And all I'm saying is one of the reasons that there's not a lot of that going on is because it's expensive. And we're paying a lot of money in property taxes. And most of the islanders that I know don't feel that we're getting a hell of a lot back for the amount of property taxes that we're paying. So we feel, why not have local government kick in and cover those costs, and then the island will do a better job of observing, monitoring, and protecting our groundwater.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. I'm just going to jump in here. We've spent quite a bit of time on one comment and question, so we're just going to move on here, I think, if that's okay with the panelists here. We've got Rick Thaddeus had sent an email in earlier mentioning that property owners are usually forced to drill their own wells every 50 feet, and the water comes from the same aquifer. There are some informally shared wells. This practice is expensive and counterproductive. And he's suggesting that there could be incentive or more information around small water systems. I was just wondering if maybe Jack Davidson from Vancouver Coastal Health might be able to comment on that.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah. definitely small water systems are an option. I think just to clarify, anything in British Columbia that involves two connections serviced from the same water source, so be it a shallow well or a drilled well, that is considered a water system under the Drinking Water Protection Act. And the challenges there with like a very small system is that they have the same regulatory requirements as like a 50 connection system or like a 100 connection system or a 500 connection system. So um, there's requirements in terms of monitoring, which is like what we just talked about, and sampling, and those costs come down to the owner of that system. So there would be more oversight for sure from our end in terms of assessing water quality from those systems and ensuring that uh, potable water is being provided. But that does come at a cost to the system owner, and a liability to that owner as well in terms of sharing water with multiple users. Um, Also, beyond a certain threshold, there's other regulatory requirements that may kick in terms of water licensing or establishing like a utility or a water users community in terms of governance structures. And those fall to other ministries. So, um, you know, to be frank, there's a lot of kind of under the radar systems out there. There's a lot of neighbors sharing wells, and we're not really in the business of kicking down doors to search for those. I think the economies kind of make sense for a neighbor to share a well, so I can see why that would happen. But yeah, it's something that if we're approached, we'll definitely provide the resources and information necessary to establish a system.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, I've got a follow-up question then. In case you determine your well could be affected by a neighbor's septic, how do you report it and what is the course of action?
Um, I mean, there's a lot of nuance there. It really depends on, the could be affected by a neighbor's septic. If it's a direct setback issue, so if it's under 30 meters, like 100 feet between the well and the septic system, that's something we can clearly take action on under the sewage system regulation or the health hazards regulation, because those setbacks are prescribed in legislation. Um, so we can write orders, tickets, what have you, to remediate that situation. Um, where it becomes trickier is like if you have concerns that potentially your neighbor's septic system is affecting your well, but it's beyond that setback distance. There's a lot of burden of proof there that you'd have to establish in terms of demonstrating that septic system is the cause of the contamination. And there's nothing to say that your neighbor could hire an expert to refute those claims, right? So we don't have the expertise under our like jurisdiction essentially to like claim that that septic system is causing that contamination outside of setback distances or very obvious failures, like sewage running down the hill into your well. So
Thanks, Jack.
it's a nuanced question for sure.
Thanks, Jack. And if anybody's curious, Jack is local and he does have a 485 phone number that I can give you if you give me a call.
Yeah, I take regular trips over to Savary to inspect the water system and some of the food premises there as well. So
Thanks, Jack. Okay, so we have another question here. I think this one's probably best for Sylvia. How do other communities in BC with urban density like Savary protect their water?
Well, yeah, it has oftentimes you won't see this level of density of communities without some sort of shared service, either a water supply system and sewerage system. The current or modern day subdivision regulations require much larger lot sizes to have an individual well and septic on located on them. And so within, I've already mentioned, locations or neighborhoods or communities where it is an individual well and septic system, such as in the regional district of Nanaimo, rural areas. It's up to the individual property owners to undertake the maintenance and operation of their own water sources. And as such, the regional district, provides support to them to do that. They also undertake groundwater studies, such as the qathet regional district invested in this groundwater study, and do aquifer signage and that sort of thing. It also depends on the local conditions and the aquifer characteristics. So, some aquifers are more or less vulnerable, and as we've shown, Savary is a relatively vulnerable source because much of the aquifer is unconfined, and because we do have that high density of potential contaminant sources overlying it. That looks like there was a related question about the well density, or about the density of development and water intensiveness of water use. And definitely, I think increasing density, such as, multiple homes per parcel and, high increased population and that sort of thing are likely to increase stress on the aquifer. So it's something definitely to consider. And in terms of the jumping back to the water quality piece, I mean, it is the responsibility of the well owners to ensure that the water that they drink within the well is of potable quality and that their health is protected when they're using that source. Usually, we recommend that bacterial samples be collected 2 to 3 times per year, and the cost for a bacterial sample can be much less, so in the range of $50. Compared to a full geochemical suite, which may only want to undertake maybe every 3 to 5 years, or if you have a consistent water quality, you may not need to repeat that. So people notice a comment about it being $500. So a $500 would be like a full drinking water suite, like every parameter. And it may not be necessary to do that, especially, the bacterial quality is important to know, because it could influence whether or not you want to install some sort of disinfection like a UV system or something like that. And or to take other measures to disinfect the water before use. And I think that definitely the logistics side of that is a challenge on Savary, as we discovered through Health Authority. We got support for the Health Authority to take some bacteriological samples. But I think maybe having we talked about like having a bottle drop-off location or pickup location where people could easily pick up sample bottles and stuff like that. That would help people to kind of twig them, or you could have a drop-off spot and arrange with the lab for a community or a neighborhood to do sampling around the same time. Those types of things that could be looked at that could reduce the cost and make it easier for folks. And definitely RDN are one community that has rebate programs for well testing. And that has also benefited them in and having, where people have chosen to share the results of the water quality testing. They've been able to undertake regional studies and show, and analyze the data. And that's been really beneficial to understanding groundwater conditions as well.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm gonna skip over because we did spend some time on some of those other questions. We have a question here. Sylvia, can you please clarify the implications of the current water demand is up to 7% of the annual recharge? Is this deficit compounding? When would we expect to see impacts at the current rate of usage?
Yeah, so in general, we've highlighted the fact that our belief is that most people are very conservative in their water use on Savary, and I think that really benefits the aquifer. So because it's off grid and people have to have their own power source, it naturally kind of is more conducive to living with a smaller footprint, as it were, energy wise and water wise. And so a lot of, we've made a lot of assumptions into that value. As in addition, those thresholds, are relatively arbitrary. So if you say, 5% is a low, 5% or lower is a reasonable level of aquifer stress versus 7%. But I mean, I think that the point being, it's not just about the water balance, it's about the well operation, the vulnerability of some certain areas to intrusion and salinization, especially on the West Island and the eastern and western sections of the island seem to be the most likely to be impacted by that. And so seeking alternate water sources and ensuring that there's sort of management and mechanisms in place to help to prevent adverse impact.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Yeah. So, and I think definitely, if we're having a longer dry season and we're using a lot in that dry season from aquifer storage, that's when we start to run into problems.
Thanks. Laura, I have got a question here that someone has shared with me. Is there a way to institute an enforceable ban on lawn watering during the summer months, similar to the existing fire ban practice?
Well, in most communities, they do, or many communities, they do education around drought levels. So one idea for Savary, even though people are using their own water sources, you could have a sign, where you come onto the island and say, okay, drought level X, drought level 1, drought level 4, or whatever. And that could be informed by, provincially, they have the drought portal, and that publishes information on monitoring and current conditions within different regions of the province. So that signage or that drought level could be published by the regional district or determined independently by the regional district, and that could help inform education and conservation campaigns that could be applied to individuals. Also, just, best practices for ownership on the island. They already there's already a brochure out there that talks about, what you should do as a good property owner on Savary, and it talks about not, having a lawn and things like that. Definitely outdoor use is one of the highest uses.
I just wanted to interject for a moment. We're over time. We had advertised this to finish at 7:30. So I think there's just a couple more questions here, and then maybe we can wrap up. And if you haven't had a question answered, or you think of something after the webinar, you can email us at planning@qathet.ca. Yeah, so maybe just, Julia, do you want to go to the last two questions there?
Yeah, certainly. I have a question for Sylvia. Can garden fertilizer impact the high nitrate levels?
Definitely fertilizer contains nitrate. And in agricultural areas, locations where they use artificial or natural fertilizers can have elevated concentrations of nitrate. I would probably say that on Savary, it's not a major source of nitrate to the aquifer, that the septics would likely to be a more significant source. But obviously, any best practices in your garden as far as limiting, overuse of nutrients and fertilizers, and limiting use of herbicides and that sort of thing could have benefit.
Thank you. And then we did have a question wanting to go into a bit more detail about carrying capacity. And carrying capacity is something mentioned in the community plan now, it's 2006 carrying capacity. Is that something, Sylvia, that you can maybe talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, that's a challenging one because essentially the carrying capacity depends on the amount of resource intensity, like the resource usage intensity. So it can really vary. So if you have a very small cottage and a composting toilet that doesn't use water, and everyone did that, maybe you could have a higher population on the island. But if you have large homes with multiple bathrooms and lots of water use, and so it has to do with personal behavior as well as the environment itself. I would say that in terms of density, like, there's definitely a benefit of having areas or having less density on the island. So the conservation parcels or amalgamating parcels, there is benefit because you're using less of the resource and you're potentially introducing less contaminant per area through the septic systems.
Thanks, Sylvia. Okay, Laura, I'm going to send it back to you. We've gone through quite a few questions today, and it's 7:45. So just out of respect for everyone's time this evening, maybe we can just say thank yous and wrap it up.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, and thank you all for attending. Thank you, Sylvia, for the presentation. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I have a feeling we're going to be having more conversations after this webinar. But the assessment report that is available on the Savary Island Community Plan webpage is there for everyone to see, and the recording of the webinar will be uploaded. So if you would like to watch it or get your friends, neighbors, family to watch it, it will be available in the next few days. And as I said before, if you have any burning questions, please call Julia or I at the office or send us an email.
Thank you so much. I was really appreciated the opportunity.
Thanks, Sylvia. Good job. That was a long haul.
Too chatty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
You